Good afternoon, everyone. So for today's case, we're going to be talking about the New York Times paywall case. And for this case, we're going to be analyzing it. And my group members for this case is Khalid Al-Thani, Abdulla Al-Saai, and me, of course. So we're going to first start off by looking at the agenda of today's case. I'll first start off by talking about the company's history. And then I'll talk about if the paywall is working and what indicators show that the paywall is in fact working or not. In addition, I'll also talk about how it's appropriately designed compared with the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal. Moving on, Abdullah will then talk about the long-term forces impacting the newspaper and the journalism industry in general. In addition, he will also mention what the industry market shifts the New York Times should be aware of for future product and marketing needs. And finally, Khalid Al-Thani will conclude by looking at the New York Times design decisions, such as why they decided to use a leaky paywall instead of a bulletproof paywall. He'll also talk about the different strategies they use for their paywall. And finally, he'll compare this with the Wall Street Journal. So to begin with, let's start off with the history overview. So the New York Times is a flagship daily newspaper of the company that was founded in the year 1851 by the journalist and politician Henry Jarvis Raymond, which is the person on the left, and the former banker George Jones. By today, they have won 117 Pulitzer Prizes, the most of any news organization in the world. During the year 2011, which is when the case was published by the New York Times, the New York Times was the leading global multimedia news and information company within 2011, with revenues of above $2.3 billion and operating profit of $57 million. Finally, over the years, they have expanded and currently they own many other newspapers, such as the Boston Globe and many others that are presented in the business unit diagram. Even though they have expanded greatly, the New York Times still brings in about 67% of the total revenue. As you can see from the diagram on the right, these are all the business units involved in the New York Times. So now moving forward to the actual paywall. I'd like to first start off this discussion about the paywall by talking about what the goal behind having a paywall for the New York Times is. So the goal for the new paywall in particular is to draw revenue from subscription and loyal readers, while maintaining the attractiveness for casual users, which represent such a majority of their online traffic. Here, in this case, the picture shows the subscription request as the reader has reached the 20 article a month limit. With the new paywall working, we can start off by saying that the New York Times is not working for several reasons. First of all, they had the minimal subscriber increase, which they only gained 390,000 subscribers compared to the potential market available of 123 million users. Thus, even though they started their growth pretty fast, it has been slowly declining. Next, the leaky paywall, which Khalid will cover further on much later, talks about how people will pay different things depending on which route they use to get to the article and the number of articles they're allowed per month. Finally, when it talks about pricing, the new paywall costs a staggering $455 a year. In page 7 of the case, in order to put this into perspective, there is a quote that says, "Does the Times really think that the mass audience is going to decide their $455 a year is better spent on the Times rather than getting 20 free articles a month from the Times, plus the Wall Street Journal of $207 per year, plus the Economist at $110 a year, plus the Daily for $39 a year, for good measure still have around $100 left?" So the fact is, the new paywall created by the New York Times asks their subscribers to pay a fee of $455 a year, which is staggeringly higher than any other newspaper available. Moving on, I will talk about some indicators of success that is shown by the New York Times. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, they own the Boston Globe, and the Boston Globe also started the Paywall service, and they gained 16,000 paid subscribers in December 2011, which is pretty decent for the size of the newspaper. And also, as I mentioned earlier, they did receive 390,000 subscribers in only a 9-month period. Thus, there is some sort of success. However, looking at the long term, it will never be such a success. Another indicator of success by the paywall is the fact that the paywall has helped save declining circulation revenues, which generates about 45% of the company's revenues. As you can clearly see, in the years 2008 to compared to 2011, their circulation has in fact increased, even though it's by a small percentage. And as you can also see, between the years 2008 to compare to 2009, there was a massive decline. However, due to the introduction of the paywall, the decline is actually being smaller. And as I also mentioned, the fact that their circulation growing is actually a good thing, as it represents approximately 45% of their revenues, annual revenues. Moving on to whether it's appropriately designed compared to the others. I personally think that no, it's not appropriately designed compared to the others. When looking at the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, we know that there is a lack of niche market. A niche market is the subset of a market on which a specific product is focused. The market niche defines the product features aimed at satisfying specific market needs. The New York Times lacks a niche market, since it's viewed as a general news outlet. However, for example, the Wall Street Journal has a niche market. They have a successful image as their content is unique and valuable within the market. Thus, because the New York Times is kind of like it's just a general news outlet, it lacks the market. However, the Wall Street Journal, on the other hand, is focused more on economics and financial, and people personally buy the Wall Street Journal just for these articles. Therefore, it has this niche market. Also, when looking at the brand image, the New York Times is known around, but there isn't enough brand recognition for them. An example that helps back up my point is the quote mentioned on page 2 of the case, which states, "You really can trace almost any major story these days to something that originally appeared in the Times. The only problem is that once it reaches the public, they may not have known it even came from the Times." Thus, lots of stories are actually traced back to the Times. However, people do not know the story actually came from the Times. Thus, the brand recognition itself isn't there for the New York Times, which is something they definitely need to improve. Finally, the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times do not have a leaky wall. Instead, they have a solid paywall. Thus, they do not permit any users who has not registered any access to the articles. This has helped earn the Wall Street Journal 15 million unique users to their website each month. Comparing this to the New York Times, they actually possess a leaky wall. Next, Abdulla Al-Saai is going to be talking about the industry and the problems the industry faces.
So I'm going to talk about the industry and what issues we see with the industry. So currently the issue going around is that the digital era has caused people to move towards computers when looking for information or news, which is free. There are many advantages to actually reading the newspaper off a computer rather than actually reading it off of a newspaper. Previously, as stated in the case, people would want to get the whole bundle, which is why they would still go for newspaper instead of online. And you might ask yourself what this bundle is. However, when looking at the bundle, we see that many of the things included in the bundle are being taken away by the internet. So you might ask yourself what this bundle consists of. The bundle that people look at when they get newspapers is that they want the newspaper to consist of local stories, national and international reports, news analysis, editorials and opinion columns, photographs, sports scores, stock tables, TV listings, cartoons, and a variety of classified and displayed advertising. So if you think about it, like how we used to read the newspaper when we were young, back in the day when newspaper used to be more popular. For example, when I was a kid, I would read the newspaper mainly for the cartoons that were on there, and usually there would be either like XO, or there would be word searches and all that. So I would read it for that. However, other people, like for example, my older brother was really interested in sports, so he would always want sports. So basically, getting the newspaper would have all of these things included, which is what made the newspaper very famous. However, in today's time, the problem that we see is that, for example, Monster.com has over time taken away the job section in the bundle. So, for example, how people used to previously go to the newspaper to find jobs, now they would simply, like, with a click of a button, they would go to Monster.com, and they could find jobs there much more easier. Furthermore, the industry never saw this coming. However, like in today's time, this has come to be true. And furthermore, even examples like Craigslist has taken away the classified sections of the newspaper. Car makers, it's taken away car makers, and car makers have their own websites. So, for example, like Craigslist, right now Craigslist is when you want to rent an apartment or a house. Craigslist is actually the best website in America right now. And so, for example, no one would actually go for the newspaper anymore for either of these two. For jobs they would go to Monster instead, and for apartments and all that they would actually go to Craigslist because it makes it much easier. And furthermore, car makers also have their own websites now. For example, compared to the olden days, now Mercedes and other companies have their own websites rather than behind advertise on newspapers. So I remember that when I was a kid, I used to see many car ads on newspapers. However, in today's time, I have almost never heard of someone that used the newspaper to buy a car. And the reason is as to why no one really uses the newspaper for advertising, is due to this generational gap. All the new generations, adults, are used to living a faster and more digital lifestyle compared to the older generations. Thus, the new generations find actually buying a newspaper useless. In addition, in today's modern and eco-friendly world, they wouldn't like the idea of printing paper and cutting down trees. Therefore, the idea of moving everything to online is better to environmentalists who inspire us to live a better and greener life. So as we can see, all these additions to journalism have caused a dramatic decline in the usage of newspaper. All of these together come together to show us why newspaper has declined. So when looking at this graph, as we can see, the most dramatic change is from about 2005 till 2010. When you look at the total print, it has decreased from almost 47,000 down to almost 23,000, which is a very huge decrease in total print of newspapers, and this has declined over time, which shows that newspapers are not as popular as they used to be. When you look at 2005, that was the peak of newspapers, and now in 2010, with the new generation, it has decreased dramatically. So many companies realized that online revenues from ads were actually more costly than printings of the newspapers and paying editors. This was due to the decline in print, and therefore going online and getting ads didn't compensate for this great loss which they have suffered. So basically, when they went online, the only revenue that they would get, which was like a great revenue, was from the advertising. However, they were doing both, like they were online and they were printing, and the money that they got from the advertising were not enough to actually compensate for the losses which they were getting from the paper. because they were paying a lot of money for the editors and for printing, and to pay for all of that, it was more than how much they were making from the advertising online. Furthermore, when actually going online, the depth of contact is much higher than newspaper, which is why many of these consumers decided to move online. For example, if you think about it, when you read an article online, it can be linked to a video or a soundbite, which is much more appealing to the consumer than just pictures on a paper print. For example, some newspapers actually started to reduce cost by narrowing the width of papers by 6 inches to make it more comfortable for the person. And to be honest, personally, if I could read a paper, or if I could read about something online, it would be much better to read it online, because you can have a hyperlink which takes you to another story that links to the story, for example, or you can have a video which is much more better than just a simple picture on a newspaper. One of the and then when moving on to the future market shifts, one of the biggest issues that I see would impact the journalism and newspaper industry is the development of the iPad. Seeing that we are currently in the digital era, many of the newspapers target audience either own a computer or an iPad, and this is very problematic for the newspaper industry. There are many people that are converting to reading newspapers just off of the iPad instead of actually going out and buying the physical newspaper. So there are many reasons onto why this would attract new customers and even drag the old customers. For one, they don't have to go through the hassle of actually going to the store and purchasing the local newspaper. I've personally, I've went through that hassle a couple of times where I had to go out of my way to find the local store next to me that had the exact newspaper which I wanted, because sometimes I would go and it would be finished, and then sometimes I wouldn't find the right store that had my newspaper, or they just wouldn't sell it. Therefore, this hassle, I could get rid of all this hassle by just simply converting to reading online. So instead, they can just simply click a button and it will appear on their iPad. Instead of going through all of this hassle, it just takes a simple click of a button, and they can read whichever story they wish. So consumers, furthermore, they can simply swipe through the pages instead of turning the big newspaper page, which makes it much easier for the reader to flip to the next page. So for example, when actually reading the newspaper, you have to flip the page, which is kind of a hassle. However, in the iPad, we all know how easy it is, that even little kids at the age of 5 can just simply swipe right and left to change the page, and it has become very user friendly. So furthermore, the iPad, as stated in the case, gives the reader a lean back experience, as you can see on the left, in the left picture. This is when actually reading the news, it is much more comfortable, and this compares to the lean forward, which you can see on the right hand side, the right picture. When reading off of a computer, you usually have to lean forward, and when you're on an iPad, it's very small and it's very user friendly. You can very easily kick back and read the news while being very comfortable. So the industry is moving more towards a paperless world. As I said earlier, a lot of people don't like the fact that so many papers are being printed and so many papers are being wasted. As we see around the world, there are many tree huggers. So those people will instantly convert to using the iPad because it's much more compelling to them, and where people would much rather read the news online instead of paper. Um, so when we look at all these problems, so due to all these problems within the newspaper industry, they must think of new ways to come up with revenue. As we can see, what I said earlier, the revenue from the ads which they get online are not enough revenues to cover all what they're paying to actually edit the stories and to actually sell the papers and the paperwork. And therefore, the Wall Street Journal used the paywall, and the New York Times tried to use it as well. Next, Khalid is going to continue, and he is going to talk about the paywall. with the New York Times, and he will tell you guys more about that.
The New York Times, the New York Times uh, came across a decision that they had to make, like what design would they use for their paywall. They had four different options, and they had to pick which one or ones they would go with. They didn't necessarily have to go with one. They could choose any combination of two. First of all, for the first option they had was the all or nothing. In this case, the user wouldn't get any access to any of the content except if they paid the subscription in full. The Economist and the Times of London, they both chose this method for their paywall because it gave them a solid revenue stream, and no one could use it for free. The second option they had was the exclusive content method. In this way, the news content would be available for free to everyone, since people see the news as a commodity, but they keep some exclusive articles and analyses for the paid subscribers. Time Select are based on this method. So in this option, people could see the news that everyone else could see in other newspapers for free, since it's available for free to them anyway. But the exclusive articles that are written by the journalists in the newspaper, that are written in the newspaper, you'd have to pay to get them. The third option is the metered system. In this case, all the content would be free for everyone, up to a certain pre-specified number of articles or pages, but they would need a subscription if you don't have access after that threshold. So they could get a number of articles for free, but after they use up all of the articles, then the number of articles, then they'd have to pay to get any more. Then there's the device-specific offer. This deal charges a consumer based on the device they use to subscribe. So they'll charge differently based on whether you use a laptop, an iPad, or an iPhone, for example. So based on the evolution in this field, very few publications chose this option. Then moving on, we're going to talk about the first time they experimented in using a paywall. The first experiment started in 1996. The Times launched its website and started charging overseas users $35 per month for access to their site. It was, however, abandoned 2 years later. The company cites that an interest in increased advertising revenue as the cause for the shift. We think the reason it failed was that the 1996 internet penetration it was very low. The second time they experimented with a paywall, it came up with the Time Select, which was introduced in September of 2005, and it was priced at $49.95 for access to noted columnists. Access to news and other content on the website, it remained free. They offered college discounts and other select readers, but remained free to all of its print subscribers. So within 2 years, it grew to 227,000 paid subscribers. However, later on, due to the rise of social media and high-quality blogs, it led many users to question the value content on Time Select. Also, the columnists that featured in the Time Select system, they weren't happy. An example of one was Tom Friedman. He said it pains him enormously because people had to pay. It cut him off from a lot of people. especially because he has a lot of people who read his work overseas, and because of the amount of criticism, the paywall ended on September the 19th, 2007. Moving on to the leaky paywall. First of all, what is a leaky paywall? A leaky paywall, it basically means that any consumer would be able to read 20 articles a month before they're forced to pay the full subscription to have any more access to the articles that month. This strategy helps consumers to get a taste of what they would get for the subscription and to see whether or not it would be worth it for them to pay the full amount for the product. So basically, if they got any more articles, then they wouldn't have to pay to get the articles, and if they had any less, then they wouldn't really know what the times were really about. So they chose to go with a leaky paywall, which is basically a metered system that I explained before. They chose to allow 20 free articles a month before they were asked to subscribe for more content. They also chose to implement a device-specific offer with it, which meant that consumers had to pay different amounts to get the same content on different mediums. And so the price on an iPad would be different from the price on a laptop. So comparing the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal, we find that the all or nothing option worked very well for the Wall Street Journal because they have a niche market where people prefer to read their paper over others. So people would actually go and search for the Wall Street Journal instead of not really minding which newspaper to go with. And the Wall Street Journal also have a reputation for being the best financial publication out there, and they use that to enhance their brand image. And now to talk about why did they choose the leaky paywall. They chose to allow their consumers 20 free articles a month because it represents a fair amount of articles where the consumer will get a feel of the paper and would leave them wanting more of the same rather than go for a different article. If they gave their consumers 2 free articles, a consumer would likely feel that they don't really have an affiliation with the company or the writer, so they wouldn't really feel like they need to subscribe. Whereas if they gave them too many articles, the consumer wouldn't really have to subscribe because they already have enough articles for free. They chose these two methods because they don't have a niche market, which means that people might decide to go for a different publication that offered them online content for free. By using the metered system, people would get a taste of what's on offer from the New York Times and leave them wanting more from the same journalists rather than go for different journalists that are of a different quality. They also chose the device-specific offer because they feel that they could get slightly different amounts from different consumers that use various different mediums. They chose to have differentiated pricing for tablets and cell phones because they feel that both the tablets and the cell phones are the future. First of all, the mobile advertised revenues have doubled in the recent years with the emergence of the iPad. This has seen a revolutionary new platform for consuming news. They also made the decision not to have a bulletproof paywall, which is an all or nothing method, because people would likely just go for the free option because they don't really have a niche market or a strong enough brand image. A stronger brand image would come coupled with a bigger amount of loyal customers that would keep subscribing. If they chose to go with the all or nothing method straight away, they would also push away some of their loyalists because they pushed up the price straight away rather than letting them sample the product first. Thank you very much for listening to us.